crossing the road just outside of town. The employee described it as looking like a massive dog, but said that it ran on 2 legs, not 4.
It already looked massive, but this thing must have been 7 foot plus.
That is giant.
Beneath Michigan's towering pines, something watches from the shadows, and it's been doing so for over a century. Hunters describe glowing amber eyes tracking them through darkness, while campers wake to claw marks gouged deep into vehicle doors.
What the is that?
For decades, authorities dismissed it as folklore, but new DNA evidence has surfaced that contains genetic codes science cannot explain. Government labs studying it were shut down within days, and a chilling pattern connects every single sighting to something far more ancient and deliberate than anyone imagined.
Hey, let's not go too far into the woods, John!
The pattern that should not exist. When researchers compiled every credible Dogman sighting into a single digital map, a perfect ring emerged, and every encounter since 1887 fell within miles of ancient Ojibwa, Potawatomi, and Anishinaabe burial mounds that most people believed no longer existed.
Listen, like so many other conspiracy theories, it could be people misidentifying something, influenced by what they read online.
The precision was absolute. Not most sightings. Every single documented case aligned with indigenous ceremonial grounds, sacred rivers used for rituals centuries ago, and hunting corridors erased from modern maps. When topographic data was overlaid, the creature's movements traced paths that exist nowhere in current records, as though something still walks invisible boundaries drawn before Michigan had borders.
For years, it's been Bigfoot, right?
Yeah.
But now, there's a huge uptick in the Dogman.
Forests just 50 miles south, equally dense, equally isolated, showed zero activity. The difference wasn't geography, but history. These weren't random woods. They were protected lands, and settlers who arrived in the 1800s were warned by tribes to avoid them. Those warnings were dismissed as superstition, but the pattern held for over a century. Modern wildlife officers began noticing something else. Regions with repeated Dogman activity showed balanced predator-prey populations and almost no illegal logging, as if an unseen force kept order. One ranger admitted off record that those zones stay untouched. Not because of patrols, we barely go in there. Something else enforces the boundary. This wasn't folklore scattered across frightened imaginations. It was a territorial system, intelligent, deliberate, and older than the state itself. And it all started with 2 lumberjacks who saw something in Wexford County that turned their blood cold. The pattern didn't appear overnight. It began the moment people started cutting down what the first people of this land called sacred, and the forest sent something to stop them. The forest sent a warning. 2 Wexford County lumberjacks sprinted into camp in 1887 describing a creature standing over 7 feet tall with a man's body and the snarling head of a massive dog, its hands disturbingly human except for claws curving from the fingers.
You know, it had legs, no pun intended. The story just stuck and grew bigger and bigger.
And when torchlight hit its eyes, they didn't reflect. They burned molten gold as if something alive glowed behind them. The camp erupted in laughter until other crews across northern Michigan started reporting the same figure within weeks, a shape walking upright through trees, an unholy scream before it vanished. Horses bolted from clearings where nothing visible stood. Then came the cattle, slaughtered but untouched by scavengers, as though even wolves refused what it had claimed. Loggers disappeared entirely. Their tools lay scattered mid-swing, surrounded by deep tracks that ended abruptly, as if the creature had lifted into the air. By winter, every campfire whispered the same name, Dogman.
Dogman is thought to be extremely aggressive.
The sightings followed a rhythm. 1897, then 1907, always the same terror, always near Potawatomi sacred grounds along Sleeping Bear's spine. That first wave coincided with Michigan's logging boom, destroying millions of acres of ancient white pine forests the Anishinaabe called the bones of the earth. When those bones were stripped, the howls began. But the settlers didn't understand what the tribes had been trying to tell them for generations. The Ojibwa had a name for this guardian long before white men arrived. They called it the Wendigawa, a being cursed to walk between spirit and flesh after violating the natural order. According to their elders, the Wendigawa was once human, a protector chosen to guard the boundary between the living world and the spirit realm. During a brutal famine, he consumed forbidden meat meant for the dead, shattering the balance he swore to defend. As punishment, he was transformed into something unnatural, neither man nor beast, condemned to wander the forest forever as a living warning of what happens when sacred laws are broken. To the tribes, this wasn't a myth. It was a functioning system. The Wendigawa appeared when burial grounds were disturbed, when rivers used for ceremonies were polluted, or when the balance tipped too far. Elders described its glowing eyes, massive footprints, and the way it could mimic human voices calling from the darkness. They warned settlers to respect these territories, but those warnings were ignored as primitive superstition. One archaeologist from northern Michigan University learned this lesson near Ludington decades later. His team unearthed carved stones depicting hybrid human-animal figures at a site dated to pre-colonial times. That night, motion sensors detected something tall and upright breathing heavily just beyond the floodlights. By morning, tools were scattered, equipment destroyed, and the lead researcher abandoned the dig permanently. In Anishinaabe tradition, the number 7 represents cycles of renewal and transformation. Every 7th year marks a thinning between worlds, a moment when spiritual balance must be restored. The Dogman's pattern, always returning in years ending in 7, suddenly sounded less like a coincidence and more like the land itself keeping time. Counting down to moments when warnings must be delivered. For decades, those warnings stayed in the woods, whispered around campfires, and were dismissed by morning light. But in 1987, the Dogman didn't emerge from the trees. It came through every radio in Michigan, and this time thousands of people were listening. And before we uncover what happened when that howl reached every home in Michigan, if you're drawn to uncovering truths that history tried to bury, hit the like button. It tells us to keep digging where others won't.
How big are we talking? What did you see?
I don't know. It just ran off.
Okay. Let me see what we can find out here.
1987, when the howl went public. Steve Cook created an April Fool's song in 1987 about a mythical wolfman stalking Michigan's backroads, but when it aired on WTCM-FM, police officers and military veterans flooded the phone lines, not laughing, but confessing they'd seen it, and some of them were shaking as they spoke. The calls overwhelmed the station within an hour. Truck drivers, park rangers, hunters with decades in the wilderness. None had heard each other's stories, yet every description aligned. 7 feet tall, upright posture, thick dark fur, a dog's massive head, and eyes glowing amber gold that burned in darkness. Cook later admitted that these weren't people looking for attention. They were people who'd been carrying a secret. Then the cassette tape arrived, unmarked except for a handwritten label, recorded near Manistee, 1987. The sound started as a low growl too deep for human vocal cords, rising into a howl that split into something between a scream and a roar. It vibrated through the studio's speakers as if the source was too large, too close, and too wrong. Wildlife biologists analyzed the audio for weeks. None could identify it. The frequency range fell outside wolves and coyotes. The duration exceeded what any known mammal could sustain. One expert's final report stated, "No animal in North America produces this vocalization, and no human could survive generating it." Newspapers picked up the story, and law enforcement began cross-referencing cold cases. The pattern was undeniable. Missing livestock, unexplained mutilations, and even unsolved disappearances clustered around the same years. 1887, 1897, 1907, 1937, 1957, 1967, and now 1987. Every 7th year, like clockwork. Now here is where things get interesting. That 1987 wave aligned with something else. Aggressive suburban expansion was bulldozing forests north of Grand Rapids, clearing land that sat directly atop old Anishinaabe ceremonial corridors near Luther. Construction crews reported shadows crossing work sites after dark. Families in new developments found pets missing from fenced yards. One contractor quit after discovering 5-foot claw marks gouged into a bulldozer blade overnight, marks too high for any bear, cut too deep for any known animal in Michigan. By year's end, hunters avoided certain roads after sunset.
Said a raffle a couple years ago, never fired it.
Motion sensors in state parks captured figures they couldn't explain, and journalists stopped using skeptical tones when the Dogman's name came up. The recording had transformed folklore into documentation, and what happened next would make documentation impossible to dismiss. The recording proved something was out there making sounds that shouldn't exist, but as cameras became standard equipment for anyone entering those woods, the creature didn't hide from technology. It walked directly into it. The evidence that science cannot classify.
Creature. The whole entire creature was about 7 feet tall, looked like basically a large wolf head on top of a bear's body.
Trail cameras monitoring deer paths across Manistee County started capturing a 7-foot figure in the early 2000s, moving upright between trees at speeds that made biologists rewatch footage frame by frame, convinced the time stamp had malfunctioned, except it hadn't. The first clips showed a broad-shouldered shadow darting through pines with fluid coordination, too fast for human stride mechanics, too controlled for an animal's charge. For one instant, infrared caught the eyes, 2 brilliant flares before the figure vanished. Wildlife analysts found no signs of editing or equipment failure. One biologist noted, the movement pattern doesn't match bears, which lumber or humans, whose gait is entirely different. This displays purpose and balance that we cannot classify.
I don't know. It just ran off.
Okay. Let me see what we can find out here.
Multiple cameras owned by hunters who'd never met began recording identical proportions in the same region during the same season. Then came the physical encounters. In 2007, a family parked their RV at a forested rest stop near Traverse City late at night. Minutes after the engine cut, heavy footsteps circled the vehicle with deliberate precision. The father stepped outside with a flashlight and caught a towering silhouette just beyond the beam's edge. Massive shoulders, a canine profile, eyes reflecting molten light. Before he could move, something slammed the RV hard enough to lift it on its suspension. The family fled in terror. Investigators found 5 parallel gouges the next morning, carved across the metal siding, each cutting nearly half an inch deep and positioned higher than any bear could reach. The spacing matched a hand with claws. That same year, Michigan's gray wolf reintroduction program sparked controversy as hunting permits were issued, and environmental groups warned the species faced extinction again. Within months, Dogman sightings spiked across the same regions where wolves were being culled. A dashcam recording from Cadillac captured something crossing a rural highway on 2 legs, clearing the road's width in seconds before melting into the tree line. Its size defied human proportions.
I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't think it picked me out. I just think it was there, and I was there.
A retired wildlife officer analyzed the footage and said, "You can fake sound, fake light, fake a story, but you can't fake the fear in someone's voice when they describe this. These people aren't acting." Then in 2019, 2 hunters from Sheboygan County stumbled from the woods before dawn, claiming something massive on 2 legs had torn through their campsite. Authorities found the tent shredded, trees gouged by claw marks deeper than any known species could produce, and the ground stamped flat by something enormous moving through on 2 feet. Tangled in the torn fabric were clumps of coarse gray hair.
Wisconsin isn't the only upper Midwest state where wolfen monsters are seen.
The samples went to a wildlife genetics lab in Marquette, expecting routine wolf or coyote confirmation. Instead, the DNA sequence revealed 2 distinct genetic codes in a single strand, one matching North American canine, the other displaying markers found only in primates. Assuming contamination, the lab ran 3 sterile retests. Each produced identical results, a hybrid signature that corresponded to no species on record. A Wisconsin lab cross-verified the findings and confirmed the anomaly. Internal notes leaked online weeks later included one line that made researchers go silent: possible cross-genome mutation or unidentified primate lineage. The official statement released to the public read, "Results inconclusive due to sample degradation." But everyone involved knew that wasn't true. The DNA proved something biological existed in those woods, something that blended species in ways science said couldn't explain.
Okay, bear with me. There have been a ton of recent sightings of this human wolf-like creature in Michigan.
And that's when the government decided to do the unthinkable. The government's action. Within 48 hours of the DNA results leaking online, 2 unmarked SUVs arrived at the Marquette facility. Men in dark suits walked in without signing visitor logs. And by morning, every file, backup drive, and physical sample had vanished, as if the Dogman research had never existed. The lab was shut down for protocol violations, and funding evaporated. The lead biologist stopped answering calls. When journalists tried to investigate, they found locked doors and staff who refused to speak. Freedom of Information Act requests were denied with the same phrase every time. Disclosure may endanger public safety. But how does animal hair endanger public safety? Because it wasn't just hair. It was proof that something existed outside accepted biology. And acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that environmental damage was triggering something ancient to respond. The suppression wasn't limited to one lab. A man in Gaylord reported officials confiscating his trail camera during a wildlife inspection after it captured an upright figure crossing his property.
This was something different. I had my cell phone with me and turned on the camera and started taking pictures in the direction of the sound.
The footage was never returned.
Sometime later, I decided to look at the pictures I had taken. When I looked at the first one and zoomed in on it, I was shocked.
Hunters who'd spoken openly about encounters suddenly went silent. A former park ranger admitted anonymously that he'd been ordered to classify unexplained attacks as bear incidents, even when claw marks didn't match any known species. They said it was for public peace of mind, he whispered, but it felt like a warning to stop asking questions. Steve Cook, the DJ whose 1987 song had accidentally revived the legend, later said in a rare interview that officials had told him to stop asking questions. His voice trembled as he said it. Internal wildlife databases were quietly updated with classified entries for northern Michigan. Most details were redacted, but one phrase appeared repeatedly: undocumented apex predator, ongoing observation. The meaning was clear. They weren't dismissing the creature. They were tracking it, watching it, documenting its movements while keeping the public completely unaware. A retired wildlife officer who'd submitted the original 2019 DNA sample spoke under strict anonymity. I've hunted these regions my entire life. I know bears, wolves, cougars, everything that breathes out here. What we're dealing with isn't in any field manual, and it's not supposed to exist. But it does, and they know it does, and they've decided we can't handle the truth. That truth isn't just that a cryptid exists, it's that the Dogman appears in direct response to environmental destruction.
This facility is located around 2 miles away from Jake's supposed Dogman encounter and roughly 15 miles from Joe's.
Which means every sighting is evidence of damage we've caused. Admitting the creature is real would mean admitting our policies, our industries, and our expansion have consequences beyond anything we're prepared to face. It would mean acknowledging that nature has a defense mechanism we've been triggering for 138 years. And here's what makes it worse. Since 2023, wildlife sensors across Manistee have been detecting deep-frequency vocalizations between 25 and 35 Hz, too low for wolves or coyotes, identical to the mysterious 1987 recording. These frequencies spike consistently after logging operations and chemical runoff events, as if the forest itself is responding to injury. Officials are monitoring these patterns but releasing nothing to the public. Every time humanity crosses a sacred boundary, destroys a protected habitat, or poisons a ceremonial river, the Wendigoa appears. Not because it chooses to hunt, but because the curse that binds it forces manifestation when balance is shattered. The creature is both a warning and a punishment, a living reminder that some laws cannot be broken without repercussion. Which means the real horror isn't what happened in 1887 or 1987, it's what's about to happen in 2027. Because the environmental destruction currently underway in Michigan is worse than anything the state has seen in a century. And if the pattern holds, the next manifestation won't be a warning anymore. Before we continue, share this video with someone who thinks legends can't be real, because what's coming in 2027 might prove how wrong that belief truly is. 2027, the awakening we're not prepared for. The timeline is absolute. 1887, 1937, 1967, 1987, 2007, 2017, and the next is 2027, less than 2 years away. And every environmental indicator suggests this cycle will be the most violent response the land has ever generated. Deforestation across the Upper Peninsula is at its highest rate since the 1800s. Mining corporations have secured contracts to extract minerals from areas within miles of Ojibwa and Menominee burial sites. Logging operations have carved through forest corridors that remained untouched for generations. Wildlife biologists are recording habitat disruptions unprecedented in modern data. Entire deer herds abandoning traditional ranges, bird populations vanishing from wetlands, and fish die-offs in rivers with no clear contamination source. Potawatomi elders have been warning their communities. When the land suffers, the guardian grows restless. The more we break the balance, the more he must appear, and the restlessness has already begun. Park rangers across northern Michigan report low, guttural howls after dark that match no known species. Hikers describe shadowy, upright figures crossing trails, watching them from the tree line before disappearing. Motion sensors in state parks are capturing tall bipedal silhouettes, some exceeding 8 feet, moving deliberately through morning fog. These aren't isolated incidents. They're increasing in frequency. The land echoes its guardian's appearance with disasters, as if the Dogman's presence signals that balance has collapsed beyond recovery and nature must reset by force.
The animal was walking on 2 legs, but worse than that is that this thing had the head of a dog or a wolf or the torso of a man.
So what happens when 2027 arrives amid environmental destruction more severe than anything since the original logging boom? If the creature truly manifests in proportion to damage done, this won't be isolated sightings captured on trail cameras. This will be something else entirely. Cryptozoologists studying the pattern now predict sightings may spread beyond Michigan's borders for the first time.
Cat areas to St. Marie, the better your chances of actually seeing it. But to improve your chances, if you're sticking around here in the Grand Rapids area,
reports are already surfacing along the Wisconsin-Michigan line, in northern Ohio near Lake Erie, and across Lake Superior into Ontario, all in areas recently disturbed by mining development or industrial expansion, all near indigenous sacred sites. The phenomenon may be expanding because our footprint is expanding, because the zones requiring protection have grown, and because the warnings must cover more ground. And if the Wendigoa truly is nature's last defense mechanism, a spiritual guardian bound by ancient law to manifest when balance collapses, then the next appearance won't be another warning. It will be a response to the fact that we've proven warnings don't work, which brings us to the truth that's been staring at us for 138 years. The reality that makes the Michigan Dogman far worse than anyone predicted, because it was never about a monster in the woods. It was always about what that monster represents. The truth that makes it worse than anyone predicted. Here's what makes the Michigan Dogman far worse than anyone could have imagined. It's not hunting us, and we're not its prey. We are the infection it was cursed to contain. And every sighting for the past 138 years has been evidence that we've pushed nature into activating its final defense mechanism.
To howl about. The legend of the Dogman has been popular over the past 30 years.
The perfect ring of sightings around sacred burial sites. The DNA containing both canine and primate markers that no lab can classify. The government facilities shut down within days of analyzing samples. The timeline syncing perfectly with ecological disasters. The indigenous warnings spoken for centuries before white settlers arrived. Every piece of evidence points to the same conclusion. The Dogman is the Wendigoa, and the Wendigoa is what happens when we break something nature cannot allow to stay broken. The creature doesn't choose to walk those woods. The land forces it to materialize when sacred boundaries are violated, when protected territories are destroyed, when the threshold between sustainable use and permanent damage is crossed. And that's the unbearable truth the government has been suppressing. Acknowledging the Dogman means acknowledging that our environmental policies have been triggering supernatural responses for over a century. It means admitting that logging operations, mining contracts, suburban expansion, and industrial pollution aren't just damaging ecosystems, they're summoning something that appears in direct proportion to the harm we cause. Corporations, governments, developers, all operating on the assumption that nature's limits are theoretical, that warnings are metaphorical, that consequences remain distant and abstract. But the Dogman proves consequences are physical, immediate, and escalating.
Some people believe a creature that's half man and half dog could be roaming the state.
Now look at what researchers discovered when they analyzed ecosystem data from regions with repeated sightings. Those areas show perfectly balanced predator-prey populations, stable plant diversity, and almost no successful illegal logging operations. It's as if the Guardian's presence creates a protective zone where nature thrives despite human pressure on surrounding regions. The cost of that protection is fear, terror so profound that people avoid those woods, that development plans are abandoned, that exploitation slows. The Wendigo doesn't attack unless provoked. Every verified case of aggression, Joe Barger being chased after firing his weapon, the RV being struck after the family parked inside protected territory, the archaeologists being driven from the Ludington dig site, followed by human intrusion into spaces marked as sacred. The creature demonstrates power, establishes boundaries, and then retreats. It doesn't pursue, it warns. But warnings only work if they're heeded. And for 138 years, we haven't listened. The 1887 lumberjacks saw it and kept cutting. The 1937 hunters saw it and kept killing. The 1967 loggers saw it and kept planting non-native species. The 1987 developers saw it and kept bulldozing. Every generation witnessed the Guardian manifest, documented its appearance, felt the terror it inspired, and then continued exactly the behavior that summoned it. So, what happens when a warning system realizes warnings have failed? What does nature do when its final defense mechanism has been triggered repeatedly for over a century and the threat only intensifies? That's what 2027 will answer. Now, what makes it worse than anyone predicted? It is not that a monster exists in Michigan's forests, but that the monster's existence proves we've been the true threat all along. Not that it hunts us, but that it only appears when we've become the predator that must be stopped. Not that the government suppresses the truth, but that the truth indicts every system we've built on the assumption that nature's warnings are optional. In 2027, we won't be asking whether the Dogman exists anymore.
Those who want to believe in Dogman, the rest of us will just have to keep sniffing around.
We'll be discovering whether nature is offering one last warning, or whether the time for warnings has finally run out. And what comes next is reckoning. If you want to be here when the next revelation surfaces, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next time the Dogman walks, we'll be the first to follow its trail into the dark. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.